Welcome, everybody. Comic Book Conservation Live Show, episode 13. Welcome. Had a great week. Have my co-host with me, as always. Bill from Phantom Restoration. Captain Larry from Flying Out Comics. How was your guys' week?
It was good. It was good.
Good. A lot of sun. A lot of outside time.
Oh, I've been getting a lot of that. Unfortunately,
Yeah, you look a little pink there, sir.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's like
more ghost-like
yard work and weeding and whatnot.
Yeah, I was outside pressure washing the patio today, so I feel for you.
Very nice.
Well, as much as I enjoy being here, as great a week as I had, and as happy as I am to see everyone, I did kind of want to start the show on a little bit of a somber note. Did either of you ever watch Lords of the Long Box? And
I know.
Yeah.
I know
the crew there. Tim Vo, who went by TiVo, who was the main host of that channel, passed away.
Oh.
Very young.
How old was he?
I mean, I don't know exactly, but our age, my age, younger? Probably younger.
That's awful.
I'm old.
Well, fair enough, but and they had a lovely tribute. The show is going to go on, but I do want to just say that he was an inspiration to me. I very much enjoyed his style, very much enjoyed the show, and certainly my condolences to his friends and family.
Yeah.
Extended from our show. So thanks, TiVo, for everything you did to pave the way and show us how to have fun, and for everything you did for this community and this hobby. Rest in power, as we say now. And with that out of the way, let's start some hellos. Hugo Danner's here. Some shout outs. Maurice is here. Welcome, guys. Shout out if you're here. Let us know who's watching. I had personally a really good week. I got a couple of nice comic books that I won. Of course, I don't have them in my hands yet.
Yeah, me too.
A couple of comic books that Captain Larry and I were both hunting books from that World War II covers heritage auction. And that actually also has a bit of a touching story behind it. I don't know if anybody knew that, but the collector that owned almost all of those books, I think everything but maybe the Superman books, his daughter had some health issues. I think she had cancer, and she recovered from the cancer.
I remember this. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that was that collection.
Yeah.
So he sold the collection, and there is a GoFundMe. He sold the entire collection. It wasn't really billed as for her medical bills. I mean, I hope she has insurance. There's no reason for anybody in America to not have insurance.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think it was billed sort of more as a to allow her to live life to the fullest. And there's no sense having all of your capital tied up in comic books when, maybe you're not able to live your best life. So
family was first.
Father of the Year award to him.
Yeah, I'd sell everything I had.
So Larry and I helped out a little bit.
We did. Yeah, we
Usually
did,
beneficial.
Yeah, we did compare notes to make sure we weren't bidding against each other. So
Right.
that was a smart move.
Yeah,
I put in a lot of punishment bids, if you will.
I do have, if we want to do pickups,
Hopefully
I do
not
have
you
one
guys.
from the auction the week before that I just unboxed today. If anyone wants to see it.
Well,
Show of
keep us
hands.
in suspense.
Show us what you got.
All right, I'll go like this so the people can see. Larry's infectious
Oh, I love it.
drive
You got it.
for these Sodi books
That's great. Great
has
book.
finally hit me. And I have to say, seeing this in person is kind of insane.
Is it
Yeah.
that the art in that when he drew that I mean, the dead eyes and the guy. I mean, that was like huge. But yeah, I'm all about these Sodi books. That is an awesome book.
So the cover artist here is Johnny Craig, and there's nothing like seeing this book in person. And I'm thrilled to have picked this up. I actually picked this one up in the Hip Comics auction, weekly auction. And my first sort of big Sodi book, I have a couple of as you know, there's over 150 books mentioned in Sodi. That's my first kind of big one, key one.
That's awesome.
Let's go back to shout outs. Peter's here as always. Hello, Peter. Shouting out, coming to us from Salem, Mass. Don Carter, hello. Ben Stewart rather's here. Welcome, welcome. Anybody else have pickups they want to show off?
Well, I got these two.
Yeah, okay. Hold on. Let me give you the floor.
Oh, this is probably the auction beforehand. So
yeah, I'm trying to
do this without the glare of the iPad.
Yeah, it's difficult.
They're both Sodi.
I don't know this. Do you know how to give? Oh, here it is. I just figured it out. There it is. You have the full floor now, Larry. Can you show us? Sorry, it took me a minute. I had a boomer moment with the controls here on.
This is one of the other Sodi books. So I've got the plastic, but that's
just 3 months after the one I just showed off, right?
Yeah, and then there's this one. You got a better grade, so.
I am often a jerk, but I wasn't doing that on purpose to be a jerk.
No, I'm a jerk.
In one of my other hobbies in Olympic weightlifting, there's this actual running joke of, you say, well, what's your clean and jerk? Oh, I clean and jerk 213. Oh yeah, that's great. I do 214, but 213, that's great. Just always kind of one-upping one another for fun. Anyway, so we do have a show that I'm super excited about tonight. It's a show in 2 parts. We're going to open with our normal segment on fair market values. And then we're going to do a primer on what is conservation, what is comic book conservation, why would you want to do it, how does CGC define it, what is the purpose, how is it different from restoration, what are some of the weird gray areas and funky rules that CGC has that'll get a book popped over into purple seemingly for no reason. So we're going to do a deep dive on that. I'm pretty excited about it. And before we begin the rest of our show, let's just do our weekly plug for the comic book conservation community. This is our Facebook group where we hang out. If this show is not enough for you in terms of your comic book conservation consumption in a week, come join us over here. Very collaborative, very fun, and supportive community.
And our membership is up about 250 now. So that's
growing fast, having fun.
Yeah, it's growing fast.
So come join us there. And then I think if there's no one else to shout out right now, let's just begin.
Just show this real quick. Hey, everyone watching, just give a quick thumbs up.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
We appreciate
it. Ben Stewart says, is there any equity in that book, Dr. Paul? There is equity in that book. I love that saying too. Part of that comes actually from my Magic the Gathering background, where there's a lot of gamers and game theorists, and there's some people that say you should basically never do anything without equity, and game theory is fun. So I'm gaming, comic book collecting in many ways. There's like games within the game and subgenres within the hobby, and creating equity is one of my favorite things. So speaking of equity, we had this beautiful book on the right sell in that very same auction I was just talking about, the Heritage World War II covers auction. And I was watching it. I have an interest in Shield Wizard. I have a raw #1. It's probably like a VG book.
Nice.
Probably could use some work. And there are only 13 issues in this run. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But the MLJ books, and MLJ, for those that don't know, this is the company that became Archie Comics. At the beginning of the Golden Age, this is an early company that was pre-war, and they were big players in the superhero genre before Archie came around, and Archie eventually just dominated Archie and pals and girls and everything else. Mm-hmm. Eventually completely dominated the company. But early days, Archie actually wasn't even there, and/or was just one, story on one of their anthology books, Pep Comics. So they had a really cool stable of superheroes, some of the most iconic, really, in terms of the iconography. And if anybody's ever watched the hit TV show Riverdale, there's a whole bunch of references to this early MLJ material, these superhero, the Black Hood, and cool. A lot of other things going on in that show. So a lot of fun, and something maybe a lot of people don't know about, but I was thrilled to see this book come up and sell.
Sweet book.
Yeah, so
Crazy
Shield
Wizard
cover. 8. Yeah, we're going to look at the cover a little bit more. We're going to talk about it a little bit more. Shield Wizard 8 is from fall 1942, so relatively early days, war era. Only 21 universal on this book. 3 restored, 1 conserved. This is why we just don't get to do this very often. 1 conserved. How often does it change hands? As I said,
look at the total population. It's only 25 books.
Yeah, and so we were very fortunate that we had a universal in the same grade sell earlier this year. Well, less than 12 months ago. So we have a nice comparison point. As I mentioned, this book ran 13 issues quarterly from 1940. So again, early days, Golden Age, through 44. The median grade here is a 5.0. There is one 9.4, and man, what a monster that book would be to own.
My lot copy, probably.
Yeah. So a little bit more about this book. As you can see, we have this great cover. There's actually on the back wall, right underneath the 8 in number 8, there's a portrait on the wall of Hitler.
Yeah, I see that.
So you have Hitler, you have Nazis, and you have bondage, and you have women in bondage. This book it hits all of the high points for the Golden Age. It flips all the switches. This is the universal one that sold earlier this year, and we're going to see them side by side, but the conserved one, frankly, presents better than this book.
Well,
here.
I'm looking at this back cover, and
yeah,
it's got some meat left on the bone in my.
Yeah, totally.
It does not look.
This is a 5.5 after a dry clean.
I'm thinking we can
spinal
clean that
reversal.
thing up.
It really doesn't look like it was cleaned and pressed before submission, which is hard to believe, but in this day and age. Here are the grader's notes for this universal copy. Creasing to cover, light staining to cover, soiling on cover, spine roll, spine stress lines to cover. So when you see spine roll and you see soiling, you know that this book wasn't cleaned and pressed. And as we said, there is meat on the bone. Look at the grading date, though, January of this year.
That
so
was
somebody in 2024 submitted this book without a clean and press.
Well,
it's more common than you'd think.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Is it? It just seems crazy to me.
Well, let's just think about it. You come across something in a barn find, let's call it. You don't know anything about cleaning comics. So, but somebody told you to send it to CGC and have it graded, and that's what they did. They sent this one in. There was nothing done to it. It was not cleaned. It probably was not pressed, looking at the spine roll. And I'm with Phil on this one. They just threw it in there. I mean, there's a 5.5 hiding right there.
Yeah, I just worked on a Hangman comics from this era that looks identical in terms of defects, the back cover staining, everything like that. Literally the same slight spine roll. So in the 5.5 after, so it made a difference. But there's certain unnamed dealers that I see online that will routinely get collections in, and you can tell it's a time. It's a cost benefit analysis. I'm sure they even know they could, but it's just faster to get inventory out, get stuff graded that needs to be graded, and you see.
And they expect it to sell for a slight premium because somebody knows there's some meat left on the bone and is willing to go after it just a little bit more aggressively.
It's not the early 2000s. Yep.
No.
Yeah.
Well, so Shield Wizard #1. I guess I sort of skipped this. So Shield is the patriotic hero for MLJ in the vein of Captain America. The Wizard is the smartest man in the MLJ comic continuity, and so this is the book that they sort of team up in. It's just a neat team up book, again, for 13 issues spanning 40 to 44. #1 is the most valuable issue, but this is the second most valuable. I think there are 2 other war covers that also usually bring a nice premium. So
anything with Hitler on the cover,
this is sort of the key.
Premium.
Yeah, this is sort of the key outside of issue #1 in this series. And you'll see that reflected in the price. So this was slabbed in January, sold through Heritage March 3rd for $3,840. So not quite $1,000 a point, but $1,000 a point is for real big boy books in my estimation. This is a pretty strong price, really.
Yeah,
I think the bidder was looking at it the way we are, which is there's meat left on the bone. I can crack, clean, and press this.
Well, I hope we see it again. Somebody that we know maybe got it.
Probably.
Absolutely. And hopefully they send that CGC label in and get this one off the census so we don't balloon up the 21 count. Here is our conserved copy. This one, again, just sold this past week. And I think it presents a bit better. It does have this dust shadow on the back cover. But overall, I think you'd rather have this book just in terms of how it presents. We'll get to the grader's notes in a minute.
I don't know. Personally, I think I'd rather have the other one. I see the appeal for this one, but
because you want to work on it, though.
No. The dust shadows just always bother me.
Oh, okay. Doesn't like dust shadows. Yeah. People weigh defects differently, right? We don't all have to agree on that. So off-white pages here. Grader's notes indicate staple replaced top 1A, obviously, because it's conserved. We know it. It must be 1A for those of you that have already done your homework. Multiple full top of front cover. Small piece out of top of, I assume that means front cover. Small multiple tear spine, stain bottom of interior front cover, tear left center of front cover. So what I'm seeing is one staple was replaced.
It's basically unrestored for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
I mean, it isn't, but
it's technically conserved because the staples were replaced. And by the way, we'll talk about this a little bit more later. The fact that it received conserved grade means that the staples were replaced in the A1, which means it was professionally done, which according to them means they were vintage staples. So it was done properly. That said, how often have you replaced staples and sent it in and CGC didn't notice?
More times than I can count.
I mean, I definitely have. I think this is one resubmission or one just hiding your witness marks for your staples away from being a universal label.
Yeah.
Well,
frankly, because nothing else has been done that would kick it into conserved status or lock it in there.
I've seen books like this end up in universal labels. It's not a like, how did that happen? It's I expected that to happen.
Yeah, absolutely, right?
Yeah, I just replaced the staples that that Smash Comics I've been working on, and it came with shiny silver staples, which clearly weren't
Mhm.
from a 80-year-old book. So I
Mm.
put some vintage staples back in it, but we'll see what it comes up with. That's the one that I had to recreate the spine. That was the leaf cast.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to come back conserved because of your other conservation work.
Well, I hope so. I got it right
The
in
point
front of me
here,
actually, but yeah.
the point here is that nothing else would kick this into conserved status on this book.
Yeah, I'm
It's
looking at
literally
this,
just
and
the staple replacement. So
Yeah.
I think there's
that's kind of
equity in this
reaching.
book too. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, by definition, this is what should have happened. On the other hand, a good conservator most of the time can replace staples, unless there's rust migration in the paper, but
You don't see
then
it in the
that
notes.
ought to be in the grader's notes, and it's
Yeah.
not.
No.
So I don't know who conserved this book, and I certainly am not judging them from here, but it's something that I would be interested in trying to resubmit if it were my book.
Well, the other thing is, if they may have put it in the notes when they submitted it. I put my conservation
Yeah.
work in the notes, and if staples were replaced, who knows?
Yeah, but I know of many instances where we disclosed work that was done in CGC did
Didn't say a
not
word.
indicate
So,
it. Yeah, right.
Personally, I've replaced staples more times than I can count, and I've never had an issue other than one time. And I knew when it said staples replaced, it was because I forgot to close. It was one of my own books. I forgot to totally close the prongs. So they viewed it as
Rookie error.
they viewed it as manipulation to some extent.
It's-
So in this case here, it could be someone someone just tampered with the staple here in the top and made it look like, maybe they took it out to take the book apart, got scared and put it back, but put it back flipped by accident. So it's the original staple. It's just
So the
the
witness marks
orientation
wouldn't
is
match
upside
up.
down, so the marks are just off. So and
And-
they don't know the history. They just see it as a vintage staple that is there's
Sure.
something that looks like it was replaced.
Sure. And for those listening, disclosure is the most important thing in our hobby, in our sub hobby of conservation here. And I would never sell a book to somebody without disclosure. I wouldn't work on someone's book without disclosure, etc. That said, when we put things back, we try to put them back the way we found them, because that's what's best for the book, and because everybody wants to preserve the book in as close to its original condition as possible, given the constraints we were working with. So we're not trying to fool CGC so much as we're trying to put it back so that it would fool anybody, not, again, because we wouldn't disclose the work, but because everybody wants the thing to appear as it was originally. And that's why we take such pains to keep the staple orientation and match up the witness marks in the paper and everything else that we do.
If it's done right, there's no evidence that it was done at all.
Right.
Yeah, and that's not to be deceptive. That's just
exactly.
It's really just professional practice. It's a nuance of the.
In the same way that if you work on a vintage Corvette, you need to replace the fan belts. You get the original AC Delco fan belts from Chevrolet that look exactly the same and are indistinguishable from the original, not because you're trying to fool somebody and say, hey, these fan belts are 40 years old, but because everybody wants it to appear the way it originally left the factory floor. So, drum roll, we missed, but $2,280 for this book in conserved because the staples were replaced. Man, did somebody get a good deal on this book.
Oh, yeah.
Look at this. Wow. Only 60% of the universal price. Now, I think the universal was inflated a little bit because I think people that were bidding on that looked at it and said, man, a crack clean and press, and I've got a 5, 6, something kind of range. Even so, I think that this conserved book was a great deal at this price. Again, I recognize over $2,000 for old paper for a funny book. That's a lot of money. But I still think when you're talking about a collectible this important, this rare, this old, this sought after, in such low market availability, how often these come to market, $2,000 is kind of a steal. So in conclusion, Nazis and bondage, always popular.
There's some monsters on there too.
Yeah, that's true.
That's right.
Yeah.
The horror element.
Yeah. Very light conservation on this book. I think someone got a hell of a deal. And again, that was just this past week. That was in the auction that Larry and I, well, all three of us were watching, and Larry and I were actively bidding in, and each won a couple of books from. So congratulations to the winner of this book. I think they did very well. I think this book was well bought, as they like to say in the auction biz. Anything else we want to say about that?
No.
I just want to answer this one question to someone.
Yeah, there's two questions.
So let me just say, as someone that works on books professionally, I've had certain clients before come to me with certain jobs and like groups of books of this specific book saying, I want to get these and make them look. And I think at a certain level, part of me says if you're taking all new old stock parts of the books and they happen to match perfectly, I'm not trying to be deceptive. It's more like unbelievable that you got them to match, because the reality is you're going to take those and like you got to have the staples match perfectly. You have to have the production cuts match and perfectly. It's insane. And you have to have the where the margins are. Like there's so much that goes into it that some people, it's like if you're going to go through all the trouble of doing that, you kind of almost like, good for you, you did it.
You deserve the universal.
To happen, then it happens. That's what I tell people. If the stars align, you found new old stock parts that match. But otherwise, just anticipate getting a conserved grade and a marriage notation. That's what I say is a realistic expectation for something.
We're going to talk about that a little bit more in the next segment. My sort of input on that is, I've talked on my channel a few times about how sensitive your fingertips are. The human finger can actually feel 20 microns bump, and that's on a rough surface. On a perfectly smooth surface, a human finger can feel a 10 micron bump. Do you know how perfectly you have to put a centerfold back in a book so that the edge of the paper lines up within 20 microns of the rest of the paper? It's insane. It is very difficult. So again, just adding a little bit of sort of scientific fact to back up your take on this, Phil. If the stars align and it's indistinguishable, then good for you.
Yeah.
But technically, any married page is a conserved book, or actually, minus any other conservation, you can also get qualified, right?
Yeah. But the reason you don't see a lot of conserved whole clarity ones is because I think a lot of people know and or are told by the people doing the work that you're not going to want to do this, because if you're looking to sell the book afterwards, you're going to have you're not going to get your return back on the work to complete the book, because do it if it's a sentimental copy, but there's just so many copies available. People can just have them pick another copy that's
it's not a rare book.
It's going to be qualified anyway, and the one with the value stamp cutout is qualified as well. So there's no juice in the squeeze there.
Hey, that said, any copy of the book is
it's cool.
So it's
we love all books,
but I understand the incentive to want to do that.
John Earl is asking a question about removing ink from a book, and my answer to that, John, is we need to know what kind of ink you're talking about. Is it ballpoint pen? Is it dry erase marker? Is it grease pencil? We don't know. So but most everything stays in a bath. It doesn't come off.
It's what's called color fast. So the way we talk about this in the industry is inks that do not bleed under exposure to water are called color fast, and most inks from most pens are color fast. Some markers will have a little bit of the ink bleed, and other than that, most anything that is a pen is, or considered a pen, is going to be color fast and is not going to be removed. But shout out to John Earl. Thanks for joining us. And
thanks for the question, John.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And hey, Travis, thanks for joining us. Good to see you. All right, let's start our next segment. And I think this segment should be plenty interactive. So we can kind of just pause anywhere and take questions. And if something's going to be a little bit later in the presentation, I may hold off on it, but we can respond to things as we go. So this should be fun and interactive.
This little blurb that you put in.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple of interesting things from the Facebook group and from running this live show and the channel generally. Not a lot of people know what comic book conservation is. If you explain comic book conservation to a lay person, if I talk to my mom or someone I met on the street, I explain all this, and then I hear, so you restore comics.
Yeah, that's where
sounds about right.
Yeah.
And of course, I think that's fine. I generally say yeah, in terms of a lay person's understanding. Yes, that's what I do. Obviously, there's a huge difference in our little nerd community, and there's a huge difference in the equity in these books and in the fair market value. And it is very important for collectors who care about it. We're going to talk a little bit more about the term conservation, what it means, and a few other labels that are similar and often used interchangeably in many collecting communities, not just comic books. But I wanted to just open with this statement. CGC makes mistakes. They do. They consist of a group of humans, and humans are not perfect, so there are mistakes there. However, they are way better at their job generally than we hacks that are sending books into them. Most of the confusion, most of the ranting and raving maybe gets a lot of YouTube clicks. Most of the conspiracy theories maybe get a lot of YouTube clicks that are either for a book that didn't get conserved or got conserved and someone thought shouldn't, or gets a purple label when someone thought should get conserved. The majority of those are because folks don't understand the rules that CGC has put forth. Again, some of them are CGC's mistakes, but few of them. CGC, they're pros. The only pro here in our room is Phil, and Phil, I'm sure, would concur with this sentiment that I've put here.
More or less, yeah. I would say, yeah, just with the disclaimer that they have a 100% track record of standing by any mistakes that they will make and saying, oh, like this should have been graded this way the first time. It just got reviewed differently because there's a nuance to grading and they can't always see what was done, and they're doing their best to tell the story, and it's understandable.
Yeah, we're going to go through some of the gray areas and some of the difficulties. But I think I see this all the time. I see somebody ranting and raving about the purple label that they should not have got. They followed all the rules. CGC screwed up. CGC's watching my channel. CGC's got their eye out on me. And then
CGC's watching my channel. I love that one.
Look, we are all.
I hope they're watching my channel. I love that.
We're insects. Yeah, we're beneath their notice. Other than the folks who are professionals like Phil, like Kenny Sanderson, that interact with them regularly on behalf of clients. The rest of us hobbyists, they're not watching us. And frankly, when I hear you ranting, I'm looking at your book going, I know exactly why it's purple label. You didn't follow this sub little rule. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. And so we're going to go into some of those. But I just wanted to open with this in part because it's our show. We get to do this. All right, so I'm going to back up a little bit. Comic book enhancements. These are definitions taken from Matt Nelson's book, the CGC Guide to Grading Comics. So he has three kinds of enhancements. Preservation is the first one and the most straightforward. Preserving in current state by means of protecting from hazards. So literally examples are like bags and boards, temperature and humidity control, keeping your space where you store comics pest-free, rodent-free, bug-free, etc. These are important things. And one really interesting thing about the Facebook group about it. So I have a little survey that people are supposed to answer to join the group, just to make sure that we're not getting scammers entering or other people that are just trying to, spam things into our group. And a significant percentage of the people coming there are looking for this information. So they think what the group is about is how to store comics, how to find the right bags and boards, how to put them in bags and boards, what temperatures, what humidity, what lighting situations, that sort of thing. The group isn't really about that for the most part, although I welcome that. And also I find it really fascinating. I would say about a quarter to a third of the people coming to the group are actually looking for this kind of information. And I think that means that there's a desire, there's a hunger for this kind of information, and we should provide some. So I'm going to start putting more of this kind of content onto my channel as soon as I get a chance to start doing some content creation again. But this is, super straightforward. There is a lot of it. There is overlap here with conservation as an actual industry and as professionals, because of course, preservation of our library and museum artifacts is one of the main jobs of conservationists. And so there is good science here. There is a lot of information. As comic book conservators, most of the time, though, we're dealing with a book that's in a really messed up state, and we're trying to do something else to it. So the other group of comic book enhancements that is listed in the book is restoration. Restoration includes additive and subtractive methods to stabilize and enhance the comic. Materials used may or may not be archival. The intent is primarily aesthetic, and CGC does provide distinction if the restoration is amateur or professional level, and the kind of restoration and the amount of restoration. So they have had a restored label since day one, since they opened their doors in 2000. And they have tweaked the definitions. And in 2014, they put out a big rearrangement. And that's when they also launched conservation. And at that point, they redefined some of what goes in restoration. And they started their scale, their ABC scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scale. That was 2014, so a decade ago already.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And then lastly, conservation, which is what we're mostly interested in and focused on here. Notice how many things are similar here. Additive and subtractive methods to stabilize and enhance the comic. That's exactly the same as it is for restoration. Materials and methods are always archival, and intent is not primarily aesthetic. So the intent must be conservation. It must be one of preservation. Now, if it also improves things aesthetically, that's okay. But anything that improves the aesthetics but doesn't provide preservation or conservation cannot be in conservation. And only materials, methods, and results CGC deems professional are granted conservation state. This is another thing about my opening statement. Some of the people that are ranting and raving, well, I used this material. Sure, but did you apply it in a professional manner? Were the results consistent with what we would expect to see in a library or in a museum? If the answer is no, then that's a purple label. It's simple. It really is when you understand all the rules. There are a lot of rules, though. And we're going to get into those. We're going to get into those. So the conservation label was launched in 2014. Those of you that don't know, Matt Nelson actually came into CGC. He ran originally a restoration company. CGC acquired it. That's how he came to work for CGC. And then he moved up through the ranks and became head honcho there. Mm-hmm. As part of his background, he's done a lot of things. He was a dealer. He was a comic shop owner. He was a restoration guy. He was on the forefront of cleaning and pressing and a lot of things in his career. And I think that's one of the reasons it made him really suitable as president there. But his main interest in restoration being, his background, it was important to him to get really mature CGC's labels for restoration and to provide collectors with a lot of additional information. Not all restoration is the same, right? We talk about this all the time. You know, you can have one little dot of ink on the spine, and that's a purple label. You can have another book that the entire cover has been recreated, also a purple label. Those should not have the same value to a collector, right? It should be obvious. And so this revamp of the restored label and the introduction of the restoration scale in 2014 came with something else. And again, I want to give credit here. CGC led the way. They established the conservation label. And the thinking here was, why should we? So there was already a discount to restored books by 2014, a deep discount in some cases. People were getting punted in the marketplace for restored labels. And some of the work was really laudable. Some of the work was just to preserve these historic documents, and it was done in a scientific fashion, and it was done with the best intent of the book, not purely aesthetically so that we could try to get more money for the book, but to preserve what's there and the cultural heritage of American comic books. And it was thought, why should that be punished? So that's why the conservation label was created. And I think largely it's borne out that way. While the conserved label sells at a discount to a universal label, as I believe it should generally, it sells generally for more than a restored label. And we've been demonstrating that sort of week in and week out, with few exceptions, in the market report. So I just wanted to give a little bit of history, give credit where it's due here. They have actually refined the conserved rules a little bit along the way. I'm not going to talk about the history of those refinements and little subtle changes, but we touched on one of them last week when we talked about a book that Phil conserved some time ago when traditional piece fill was acceptable in conservation label, in which today it is no longer. So, you know, if you want to really get into the nuance of that, we're going to talk about the state of the art today here in the rest of the deck. So these are the tasks that one is allowed to do to a book and still get conserved. If you do something to a book that's not one of these things, it may be a purple label. Tear seals. And these things, by the way, they're different. We think of like paper mending. I tend to think of paper mending as kind of all more or less the same process, but they're technically not. A tear seal is different than a spine split seal. Mm-hmm. Reinforcement is different than either of them. Reinforcement is where you don't actually have a tear, but you have weak paper and you decide to basically treat it as a tear in terms of the method that you use to strengthen it. Piece reattachment, again, technically different since the piece is loose than a tear or a spine. Cleaning, and now here, cleaning is specifically meant to mean with solvents. And put a pin in that because there's some things that are not allowed and they will kick you into restored label. Mm-hmm. Staples cleaned or replaced, both allowed in conservation, and leaf casting. Comments, guys? I've been talking for a little bit.
No. I watched an interesting interview with Matt Nelson on Swaggle House's channel.
Oh, I love his channel, by the way.
Yeah,
that guy did. I actually wanted to do a market report. I spent months thinking about how to create basically like a comic book index, price index, similar to the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And I put a whole bunch of work into how that would have to work and calculations that would have to be done and all that sort of stuff. And I just sort of backburnered it because I was busy with conservation on the channel. And then Swaggle House did almost exactly what I thought had to be done. And the guy's great channel. Those of you that aren't aware, please go.
Yeah, I popped in there and watched that interview, and I was particularly interested in the questions about the cover whitening.
Yeah,
and because that it's a big thing. There's people.
I think that's as much as Matt's come
Yeah,
publicly.
it was if for the people at home that haven't seen that, go step over there and watch that. And
Mhm.
it was it
One of
was it was an interesting take on how he envisions it. Yeah, it's pretty much along the lines of what I thought too. But over cleaning of these covers, that will get you a purple label.
one of
So
Mhm.
the one of the biggest takeaways. I watched the interview, and Matt said this before, and I think this is like it's the precise statement too. Is CGC grades the book as it is in front of them,
correct.
so
Mhm.
they
That's all they can do.
look at they can look at things that would infer a story, but depending on how certain things were done, that's why you see certain things get through, and there's certain things that are you're 100% guaranteed to get through and you know a label, and then there's certain things that sometimes just because of how it looks it
Mhm.
gets a different label, and that can be confusing. It really can be. That can be a for collectors that see that it's they just want to understand why, and sometimes it just is due to the human factor of how they're grading the
Yeah.
book.
We're going to talk about the cleaning in a little bit more detail and when cleaning becomes restoration and why a amateur or inexperienced conservator might not understand that distinction and think, well, I used all the right materials, I did the right thing, I followed Dr. Paul's, method, or I followed Captain Larry's method, and it came back purple, and I'm angry, and they must be watching me and whatever. But again, there are rules, and some of them are subtle. So let's get into that. Conservation additional rules. So that was the list of what is allowed. All materials must be archival. Interesting to me, in the book and on the website, they list for the tear seals, reinforcement, and piece reattachment, they list rice paper and wheat paste. Now, of course, they don't list this as examples of, but clearly this is just examples of, because none of us use rice paper, right? For the most part, we're using tengujo. We're using some kind of Japanese paper. Tengujo is actually made from mulberry bark. It's not made from rice, doesn't have rice in it, doesn't it's not rice paper.
Not mid comic books with race. So.
Yeah. So here's a place where there's some ambiguity from CGC. They list the archival materials that are appropriate as rice paper and wheat paste.
They could update that for sure.
And yet most of us aren't using that. We do use wheat paste, but we also use an awful lot of methylcellulose. That's not listed here. So there's some ambiguity there. But if you're using something that is used in the paper conservation literature, the peer-reviewed literature, if you can point to a reference, CGC is going to accept the material. That's the bottom line at the end of the day. Methods must be professional. So when you're working on the book, the result must look like it came from a librarian or museum curator's hands. It shouldn't look like a mess. If it looks like a hot mess, it's going to get kicked over to a purple label. Mm-hmm. Marriage is allowed in conservation, which is really interesting, but cool. Right, as Phil said, if you can find new old stock and it works, one of the reasons I think that marriage is allowed here is because the other methods that are allowed make marriage almost impossible to detect in a lot of instances, and so I think they more or less had to allow it. But nevertheless, even when it is detectable, it's allowed, which is one of the reasons I bought that Adventure Comics 61, the first appearance of Starman, because it was in a qualified label with a married page, and I knew that we could get a much higher grade conserved for that book and drop the green label. So knowing these rules empowers you to find additional meat on the bone, to find additional equity in books, and to create additional equity in books, I guess I should say.
Maurice has a question that I had a question, which you're about to get to the next part of this.
Boy.
So I'll let you say the color question.
I actually have 6 or 8 slides at the end, Maurice, regarding tape. We're going to get
Stand
into it. We're going to get into it deeper than maybe anybody wants to. So put a pin in that. Color touch, trimming, tape, all automatically push the designation to restoration. Now, here's another ambiguity. This is from the book. From Matt Nelson's book, in print, it says tape not allowed conservation. We're going to get back to that, but this is from the book. So color touch, trimming, and tape, not allowed. Here's a statement. Again, this is a statement straight from the book. So there's no excuse for anybody who takes their comic book conservation seriously to not know this. Cleaning must not be abrasive, remove sizing, or ink. If it does any of these things, the book is pushed to restoration because that's not how professional conservators clean a book. Mm-hmm. So when you clean the book and you have massively faded inks, you have a floppy, flaccid page with no card to it, and you've removed the sizing and you get a purple label, please save us the conspiracy theories, go back, read the books, know the rules, do the work correctly, and you'll get a conserved book most of the time. And if you don't, it'll be a mistake on their part and they'll fix it. Enhancements not allowed in conservation, and this is because, for the most part, they're considered aesthetic, although, again, there's a little bit of nuance here. Color touch, never allowed. Traditional piece fill is no longer allowed because they have decided that the professional standard, here's the little nuance. And I'm not sure that this is actually the consensus among conservators in the real paper conservation industry, but this is what CGC put their flag in the ground for. They consider traditional piece fill to be no longer the state of the art. Therefore, it's no longer considered professional. Therefore, traditional piece fill gets kicked to restoration. From their perspective, the professional way to do things today in 2024 is with leaf casting. And that's just what they've decided. I think you could debate that, but CGC's world and we just live in it. So just know the rules. Reglossing is never allowed. Glue, never allowed. Trimming, we've already mentioned. Now, here's what's interesting. On their website, you can find a page that says archival tape is allowed in conservation, even though the book states no tape at all allowed in conservation. I don't know, Phil, if you have experience here, if you can speak to, in the books that you've put in over the years, if you've ever been able to get a conserved label for a book with archival tape.
To
avoid it.
I'll be honest, I've had several questions recently regarding tape. Like specifically, if I were to tape in a Marvel value stamp in a Hulk 181, what would the label be? And I honestly, like, I'm hesitating for a moment because it's something I need to go back through and look. One, I would never recommend doing it ever, nor would I do it with archival tape or regular tape, because there's no difference once you're using it on a comic book. The paper is so thin, the comic book doesn't care if the tape is archival. That's the case in point. But my point is I really do need to figure this out, because in my experience, my gut reaction is that I've seen a lot of Universal books that have had the spine totally split and reattached with tape, reassembled, but it's a Universal label.
Yep.
And it's
we're
still
going to talk about that. So yeah, like I said, we're going to get deep into that.
Yeah, the archival tape.
Question here, though, is very specifically that there's an ambiguity between what they have online and what they have published in their book. And
I've heard both sides. I've heard people saying they've used archival tape and got conserved labels. I've heard people using archival tape and getting Universal labels.
I think there's a matter of quantity too. Yeah, and for all convenient purposes, folks, if you have archival tape, throw it in the trash can, please. Don't use this stuff. It's terrible.
Well, there are uses for it, but not on comic books.
It's terrible stuff.
Yeah. And to be fair to archival tape, it is even used by professional archivists in situations where a document just doesn't warrant the time and energy needed for a sort of more proper archival repair. So Narinan has a question. If they can detect comic clean, would that count as reglossing? Mark said some very interesting things in the latest Swoggle House that led me to believe he was looking into ways.
I think he meant Matt,
stems.
but yeah.
What is detect comic clean? What would that?
If they can detect comic cleaning, that the book was cleaned, would that count as?
It does not count as reglossing. Those are separate things.
Reglossing is something totally different.
Reglossing is actually spraying the comic book with something like
hairspray or
shellac.
People used to literally use hairspray, but
it makes everything shiny.
Yeah, if you've ever taken an art class and you did a painting or pastels with chalk or something, and then you put a fixative over it where you sprayed it with something shiny that set everything, that's reglossing. And it's completely different than cleaning, and when they detect cleaning, no, they do not classify it as reglossing. Yes, Matt Nelson is looking into any ways that they can trace chemical residues. And as a matter of fact, he's reached out to me to talk about some of the chemistry and some of the traces that may or may not be left behind. CGC needs to use, they're in a difficult spot. So they can't use any destructive method, right, to measure anything left behind, A. And B, they have to use something cost effective. So to date, they're still just using experience. They're still just using kind of the sniff test, if you will. And I don't mean literally the sniff test, although on some occasions it is the sniff test. They're just basically looking at it and saying, does it look right? Does it feel right? We've held a lot of these books. We know what they're supposed to look and feel like and smell like. And if those things are off, and if they fit the kinds of ways in which a book would be off if you cleaned it, then they're going to decide that it was most likely cleaned. They can't prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. They're providing their educated guess, essentially, and that's what you're paying them for. Let's see. Travis, I'm going to put a pin in your comment until we go through the segment here on tape, and then we'll get back and chat about tape again. Anything else here, guys?
Well, yeah, actually, I have something right in front of me. We're talking about archival tape, and I'm going to hold it up here for a second.
We can highlight you.
Well, yeah, if you go ahead and give me the camera. So this is a book that I purchased. I'm actually going to make a YouTube video on how to spot color touch and things like that.
Can we just gush over this book for a little while first?
Yeah.
Before we move on.
So, well, what I want to show you is this book has archival tape, and I'm going to use a ultraviolet flashlight here.
I love how that shows tape too.
I'm going to show everybody else. So take a look here, folks.
There you go.
See like that?
Oh, all the way up.
This whole thing is all archival tape.
Yeah. I'm going to show you some pictures even worse than that in a moment.
Yeah, but this is terrible. I mean, it's just, but this is what it looks like. But you take
it's invisible. Otherwise, or nearly
take it away, it's invisible. But when you buy this book, you can kind of see it right down here along the bottom.
Yeah.
And and it runs all the way through this whole cover, which is unfortunate because I was actually gonna crank out a video today on this book. It's been color touched up here at the top, all sorts of it's a horrible book. Yeah,
Larry.
I mean, it's an awesome book, but somebody did some horrible things to it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'll talk later. There's a guy who notoriously has been on eBay. I knew of him and unintentionally bought a book from him. And it wasn't until I got it.
Yeah,
I saw that he's known to get books, and he puts archival tape and maybe does some other stuff too. And to unsuspecting people, they don't know.
Yeah,
and it's nefarious behavior. I was livid. I think I got. I'll leave it at that.
My
Oh, no,
mistake.
I'm good.
Well, my mistake on this is I buy stuff and I'm so backlogged on work that
There you go.
I'll put it on the back burner. And when that happens, the I'll get to it later. And I was already past my 30 days when I finally took this out of the envelope and looked at it and went, oh.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing you can do about it. I think I paid close. This is a beautiful book. I mean, it presents well.
It's not
I
true
mean,
that there's
it
nothing
looks
you can
it
do
looks
about it.
great, and
Yeah.
I paid $400 for a bunch of tape.
So I actually have a video series, and I can put a link in the description, Larry, in which that happened to me, and I was outside the 30-day window. I actually approached the person who sold it to me just inside the window, but I was very sort of non-accusatory and nice, and they stalled me until the 30 days was up, and then they ghosted me.
Yeah, I had a guy in Canada do that. And, with Canada, you're dealing with a lot of shipping issues, and they waited until you're outside that 30 days, and they said they basically give you a middle finger. And,
So if you paid for it, though, with a credit card, you still have options.
Yeah, I looked at it, and I just a cautious tale.
Yeah.
Like I
fair
said,
enough. Fair enough. You may not want the trouble, but
yeah, I'm going to go through this book in great detail on a video, and everybody can see it. And it's got pretty much everything you don't want: tape, ink touch-up, ink that bleeds through the cover. That you can't remove that, people. I mean, that you the only way to get rid of it is to cut it out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else
My
here?
condolences, Larry.
Thanks.
All right. Before we get into tape, just one more little, not really a pet peeve of mine, but just to help everybody out. There's some folks in the community that say for something to be conservation, everything you do must be reversible, and that's a rule of thumb some people use. It's okay as a rule of thumb. Generally, the work that we do as conservationists is reversible, and it is thought that conservation standards and what is considered professional may change over time, so we ought to use reversible methods. And so that is reasonable. However, it's not actually a hard and fast rule. For example, cleaning isn't reversible, and it's clearly in the standard. Also, cleaning staples, like removing rust from staples, electrolysis, etc., that's allowed in conservation. That's not reversible.
Well, leaf casting is not really. It can be reversed, but not so much.
Well,
You're bonding the paper. So.
You can reverse it, but by the time you've washed it enough times, it's probably starting to fade inks. Would be my take on it.
Yeah.
In my
Phil,
experience with it, yeah, I would say as long as the cast was initially done professionally, then the paper has undergone the most minimal amount of exposure that having another wash, if you were to want to at some point in the future redo the cast, it wouldn't be detrimental. Which you could also remove the cast if you needed.
Well, I just redid a cast, and it was my first cast actually. On the cover, I bonded the cover together, and I wasn't happy with it, and I redid it, and it did come loose with a little bit of effort, and I was able to redo it the second time.
I think the labor intensive part is that can easily be glossed over is constantly resizing, in between the washes. So as long as that's done proficiently, the paper is going to be protected.
You're gonna lose out of the interior wraps. It's easy to lose the sizing. I mean, because if it's sitting in the fluid, long enough, the sizing is going to come out. Yeah, some of these golden age covers, they're more almost like cardstock, and you're not going to lose that.
Very unforgiving. Yeah.
I guess my take on that reversibility, Phil, is more like it's not infinitely reversible, right?
True. Yeah.
You couldn't do it. You couldn't do it 100 times. I don't even think you could reasonably do it 10 times. Is it reversible a few times to sort something out?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's loosely.
If you've done everything else professionally correctly, then yes.
Yeah.
But it's not infinitely reversible, and so
correct. Yeah.
it's not really reversible, if that makes sense, in a technical kind of a way.
Yeah.
So I just think a better, like, let's just learn the rules, and a better rule of thumb is just that the materials and methods are professional, and the intent is not primarily aesthetic. And that's what conservation is. I do think there is a comment here I want to address before
there's
we
one I
jump
wanted to
into
tack.
tape.
Yeah.
This is from Peter, who knows as much about this stuff as we do, frankly. But anyone used Archivist deacidification spray magnesium oxide on comics before? How does it
I have
compare to
not.
calcium hydroxide? I have not personally, but there's actually quite a bit in the literature about magnesium oxide as a spray, and there's a section in the CGC book about why we don't use it. And answer...
I've used it.
Please, go ahead.
Part of, I mean, I don't want to say this specifically, but it's really just used in like reserved specific cases with things that can't really traditionally be washed because the medium doesn't allow it.
Or they can't be disassembled.
So exactly, but so because part of the compromise is oftentimes you're trading the stability for kind of darkening the paper too, which is not the most ideal result. It's like using last case resorts, really. It's not a first case option.
CGC's stance on it is that the sprays potentially leave residue behind, potentially produce cockling and waviness in the paper, potentially create either ink fade or ink bleed. And so it is, per their rules, not allowed in terms of mass deacidification via sprays. Now, that said, you can use magnesium, a magnesium wash rather than a calcium wash. Like your alkaline reserve could be a magnesium bath. That would be perfectly fine.
I like having the alkaline reserve from the calcium hydroxide, though.
Yeah, but calcium has a history going back over a millennia, frankly, in stabilizing paper. So it is by far sort of the preferred method, and the sprays have these drawbacks. So I think we're ready to jump into tape, unless there's another.
Well, I just want to tag, because the Stewart family, they had a question here about CGC's restoration process. And
sorry. Let's
talk about that for a second. The three of us, we have probably never sent anything to CGC to have it restored. We work on our own stuff. That said, they do restoration removal. They do some restoration. My experience, that's a separate company within the company. So I have
it's the same company now.
It's actually the remnant of Matt's old company.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, the division is still called CCS, right?
Okay. Yeah, but
I don't believe so. I think it's totally under the umbrella of CGC now.
Yeah, because I know. Well, for restoration removal, yes, color touch removal. I have some things that I can't find the color touch for the life of me, and I'm going to send it in and just say just remove this.
Yeah.
But the other stuff, leaf casting, things like that, I don't believe that they do that. Leaf casting.
They may, but it would be for an important book, and it would. So
I think they would probably farm that out to somebody like Phil. They wouldn't do it in house.
Yeah, they subcontract work out.
Yeah,
so if a book is
subcontract it,
depending on what it is.
They have restoration in house. If it's pretty minor, they have restoration and restoration removal in house. They have folks trained in it. Those folks are trained by Matt, and again, Matt had his own business doing this, a very successful business, a business so successful that CGC acquired it. So it was doing very well. So he is an authority, if not the authority, in that area. Many people will say Kenny Sanderson is the authority. Matt actually brought Kenny in and trained him. So now maybe the student has become the master, and I think that would be a reasonable position because Matt's done a lot of other things. But nevertheless, Matt's really the one who advanced that to that stage. if a book is important enough, he's got a lot of other duties, but if a book is important enough, he will look at it, he will weigh in on it. And also, if a book is important enough and can't be handled in-house, they will farm that work out.
Yep.
So that's how that works. I think when I say important, I mean a big boy book in terms of the price tag. If you have an expensive book and you are considering them, I would reach out. I would speak to Matt directly. I would have his eyes on it and just have a communication if that's what you're interested in. But I think most people use third parties, frankly.
I would just say too, there's a lot of books that are even A, B, and C1 level restoration that you can send to CGC to have them remove it, and they will it will not pass for having for them removing it. And I'll get the same book and look at it and say, I can do this. This is what the expected grade is. The grade drop is just bigger than what their standards may allow. And sometimes too, that's enough for me to say, you got to leave the book alone, in my opinion, because the grade drop would be too much. But they will routinely not do that kind of work, because as someone that does that work, I have a disclaimer that specifically, like color touch removal, sometimes in cases it requires more than one attempt to remove everything successfully because of the nuance of the removal. And Matt has said, and I quote, like he has issues removing it himself. Like everyone, like no one is free from that. Yeah, it's a tough thing.
All right, let's move on to tape. As I said, I've went deeper into this than maybe anybody really wants to go. Confusing, gray area, a lot going on with tape. So again, per this book, the official CGC Guide to Grading Comics, primary author Matt Nelson, tape is not allowed in conserved grade. However, on their website, it indicates archival tape is allowed in the conserved grade. Phil has indicated he knows some folks for whom that has been true. So I think there's some confusing information out there, and you should be aware of that. Normal Scotch tape is even if all your other work is conservation work, normal Scotch tape is going to get your book kicked over to restoration, which is weird because Scotch tape normally gets a free pass and is thrown into universal. So why would universal plus conservation equal restoration? That's weird. And that's a nuance of the rules. They're clear. They do follow them. But I could see where somebody would say, what the heck? Tape is fine for universal blue label. Everything else I've done is conserved. But one piece of tape on it, and now it's restored? Conspiracy theory. They're watching me. They're after me, right? So know the rules, people. So why does tape get a free pass in universal? And here's an example of World's Finest 8 with a fair amount of tape on it. And I'm going to tell you a little history lesson here and explain to you why tape gets a free pass, and now why we have all these weird rules and nuances and hoops to jump through with respect to tape. And spoiler alert, it's money. So there's a fellow named Pop Hollinger who's no longer with us. He's recognized by many as the very first comic book dealer. He actually opened his first shop in Kansas, comic book shop, in 1939. I mean, comic books were barely not even a thing yet in 1939. Yeah. So he was either the very first or one of the first to be a professional comic book dealer. And he used tape extensively. He actually insisted that it enhanced the comic book and increased the value. So he actually had a little sheet of paper that he would slide in the book that said, this book has been enhanced by the tape we put on it. Yeah. And you're welcome, basically. Not only did he put he typically used this brown paper tape here that you see on this World's Finest, and I have some other examples I put together.
I've got one sitting in the other room. Looks just like that.
So not only did he put it on the cover here, as you see, and here's a Superman 2 that would otherwise be very high grade if not for Pop Hollinger. But he also put it, look how he put it on the leading edge here. And then he also put it in that gutter between the cover and the first wrap, and then the other side of the first wrap, the last page and the gutter for the back cover. That was the typical way. So, and again, he literally put a sheet of paper in there saying, "You're welcome. This comic book has been enhanced and has been fixed by me. It's a better book now. It's worth more. You should pay a premium for it because it'll be sturdier because it'll hold up better." Yeah,
it's possible. You can make the argument that in certain cases, like if there was only tape on the inside edge cover like that today, you could remove that, and you can make the argument maybe that tape actually did prevent tons of horizontal tears and wear, and now you can remove it efficiently, and the book could be better without the tape.
And that particular type of tape doesn't do the damage that the cellophane
look at
tape
this
does.
Look at this tape stain though, guys.
Yeah,
this is the same book.
Inside.
It's come all the way through.
So
sometimes that's just from the
lighting.
Once the tape's gone, it can come out. Sometimes
it could be. That's true. It could be. And look, there was actually for those of you that collect the Overstreet price guides, and I have an unboxing coming up soon. I actually just finished the run of the first 15 price guides. Issue number 12 actually has, or year number 12, Overstreet price guide number 12 from 82, 83. Had the one with Alfred E. Newman on the cover. It has an entire article on Pop Hollinger, and it mentions how he used tape on all the books.
That's cool.
And there's later analysis that agrees with you, Phil, that regardless of what the tape might have done, the book would probably be worse had he not done this. But regardless, today it's frowned upon, and well, Phil makes a living removing a lot of it.
Thanks, Bob.
Another thing
Not
that
all of it, some of it.
he would add staples. So here's an example of a book. So he would put the tape, and then he would add 3 additional staples like this, and again, put a little sheet in there that said, "You're welcome."
Yeah, he made it better.
I actually have a Pop Hollinger book.
Well, there's people that collect them.
It's
so iconic.
Go in the other room and go pick it up and bring it in here and show it to you.
You should show it off maybe next show. It's so iconic that there's actually people that collect Pop Hollinger books for this reason.
They like it as is.
Yeah. So listen, Pop Hollinger was essentially the first dealer. He was the biggest dealer. He was reselling Golden Age books more or less before anybody else was. And so, there's the whole, his eminence, him saying this is the proper way to do it, more or less became the accepted way to do it. Everybody said, well, Pop Hollinger is the biggest. He's the best known. If he says this enhances a book, then it enhances a book. So it was basically followed widely and was, if not the standard, at least accepted through the 40s, 50s, 60s. And in fact, it was expanded upon in the 70s, late 60s and early 70s by another very prominent dealer named of Howard Rogowski. Now, Howard actually picked up when Hollinger retired, because Hollinger was literally born in the 1800s. I mean, that cat was around. At the beginning of, he was already 10 years old when the Wright brothers flew their first flight. So that gives you some sense. So when he retired, Howard Rogowski became really one of the biggest dealers in the country and the one with the deepest Golden Age stock. Mm-hmm. And so if you were a serious collector of Golden Age books in the late 60s through the late 70s, you had to deal with Howard Rogovsky because he had the books you were after. There was no internet, and there were very few other places you could get this kind of material. So I know that this is a lot of text, but I want to read something to you here. So this is directly from his catalog. This is his 1971 catalog from September, but this same statement was in his catalog going back to 1967. It says, comics and other items are complete and in good condition unless otherwise stated. A prompt refund of all orders previously sold, but alternative choices are appreciated. Refunds will only be given if there is a defect in the item and the item is returned immediately. Listen to this now, guys and gals. Clear tape on the binding or inside the book is not considered a defect. Right there in print. And again, this guy was the definitive dealer at the time. This is before Chuck Rosansky. I guess
that
Buddy,
next line is golden too.
Buddy was around, but they were contemporaries. Yeah, the next line says, "Do not ask for or expect near mint or mint copies of comic books."
Get out of here! Get out of here with your. Hey, there's a crease. I don't care. I do not.
It says,
"You know how comic collectors are." Yeah,
they're all in good. So what happened was serious collectors from the 40s through the late 70s, they had to settle for books with tape on them because the two main dealers throughout those periods put tape on a lot of books. And so by the time CGC rolled around in 2000, there were these whale collectors, guys that had put together complete runs of action and complete DC Golden Age runs and complete pre-hero DC runs, and they had tape on them. And when CGC was putting together the company and making up the rules, they talked to all the stakeholders. They went out and they talked to big time collectors and whales. They talked to big time dealers. And basically what happened is the correct thing should have been that CGC should have just said, tape is restoration, guys, get out of here. And it destroys the book and it's going to be a purple label. But what happened was they had so much pushback from dealers that had huge inventory of big books with tape on them, and from whale collectors who had big keys with tape on them. And those people all said to CGC, if you're going to put a restored label on my book, I'm not submitting it for grading. It won't be slabbed. And at the time, now CGC seems like a foregone conclusion, but at the time it was not. CGC was a budding idea, and they were trying to make sure that it even happened. They didn't know it might have flopped. They were not comfortable going out into the industry and offering this service if immediately all the big dealers and all the whale collectors with tape on their Golden Age books were going to say, well, I'm not a customer of yours. So they, quote unquote, listened to the community. And they decided, and here's the statement, while tape could be considered restoration because it is usually used to repair defects, its prevalence on comic books has led collectors to accept tape as a defect rather than restoration. As such, CGC does not recognize tape as restoration, rather downgrading a comic book accordingly if it is present. Because of the destructive nature of tape, CGC believes that it should never be used on a comic book for any reason.
Well, at least they put that in there.
Right. So the bottom line here is that by every reckoning, it should be considered restoration, but the people with the money make the rules, and the people who want the money have to play by those rules, and CGC were the people that wanted the money of the people who had the money, and so they made this concession, which we still have today, 22 years later. So that is why tape has so many funky rules and why we're tiptoeing around. Tape is fine on Universal, but we'll get a conserved book kicked over to restoration, which is a crazy state of the world. But now that you understand why it happened, at least maybe you'll remember the rule, and you won't assume that CGC is coming after you or there's a conspiracy or something else when your book comes back purple. So that's what I have for you today. How does that, what do you guys think of that?
I think it's great.
It's fun, right?
Yeah.
A lot of info.
Well, it's a big question for people. I mean, they want to know if they're going to get a purple label, or they're going to get a gray label, universal, and these are huge things. No, nobody wants that purple label.
You know what's funny? I remember in the class that my mentor that I learned from, who took one of the last courses put out from Bill Cyril, I remember, when I was watching one of the recordings, the woman who took the course with my mentor, she was asking Cyril all these questions about the differences between Marvel books from the 60s, Timely's from the 40s, more modern day books. And Cyril was like, Marvels from the 60s are the worst books. And basically, it was just like, if you're going to take the work in, just put the disclaimer, I won't touch Marvels. And she was like, okay. And she made a note. And he was saying it tongue in cheek. But to this day now,
tough. Yeah.
when people approach me with tape removal jobs sometimes, and you can see it because underneath the tape, the color oftentimes on those Marvels, if it's there for too long, you can see it's already eaten away the color. So you can remove the tape, and then in other cases too,
the ink is just all gone.
Yeah, when we get
exactly.
these books, I mean, that tape's been on there for 40 years.
Yeah,
I've done it successfully too, but part of the question is, how long has the tape been on there? What conditions was the comic stored in with the tape for how long? There's a lot of factors that go into successful removals. So
yeah, we've got a couple of comments here I do want to jump into. Ben says there's a sort of a two-part comment here.
Don't do the spine work.
This is the first part. I never allow CGC to press because they don't do the spine work.
Oh, okay.
I don't have any personal experience. Of course, I've heard this a lot. I have heard that they do a relatively quick job. And for the low price point that they charge, I can't imagine that they're working a book over with a tack iron for very much time, or that they put a lot of care into it. So I would say in general, again, I don't have personal experience here, but I've heard similar from others, and you are getting what you pay for. If a book just needs a quick and easy clean and press, CGC's service may be fine, maybe all you want, and you all in one, and it's easy and convenient for you. But I have heard, again, from many people, going to a professional of your choice is probably going to net you better results for more books over time. Love this comment. Shout out to JCP. I was just removing Scotch tape with undo while listening. Awesome. Try Bestine. I think you'll find it works slightly better.
Bestine's kind of the go-to. It's glue removal.
Ben says, I wonder how many copies of Superman #1 were sold by Pop for 20 cents. Literally,
oh, God,
Pop Hollinger was buying comic books by the pound up to a ton, and he was paying cents on the pound. So he literally was selling comic books. I think his top price was $1. That was the most expensive comic book in Pop Hollinger's early catalog. So he probably did sell them for that level.
And you're a crazy person if you're the one that bought that for $1. The laughing stock of the town.
Yeah, exactly, right? What a fool. By the way, my dad, when I was a kid, always said, I can remember when comic books were a nickel. And I was like, comic books were never a nickel, dude. From day one, they were a dime. However, Fawcett Comic Books had a title called Nickel Comics, which basically was just half a regular dime comic because it was thinner.
They're like, we're not making the money on this. We can't do this.
And my dad grew up poor. That was the only one he could afford. So for him, comic books were a nickel. Serge says, hello, gentlemen in the panel. I have a question. How do you go about restoring books?
No.
I mean, I'm not sure. I says, yeah. Obviously, I don't know how to say your name correctly. I hope you understand that. Workout breaking the bank. If you bought a book for a decent price, you consider restoring a book from that. So again, we're mostly dealing with conservation. Restoration is a little different. There's a lot of overlap. I would frankly just talk to some professionals and get some quotes. I would not, if I had a good book myself that I thought I could create some equity with, I would not start practicing on it myself. Phil, through Phantom Restoration, you can reach out to him on Instagram. He does this professionally. Kenny Sanderson is another very well-known person, also from Sanderson Studios on Instagram, does this professionally. I would go out and get some quotes. I think you might find that restoration is actually pretty affordable. If you have an actual big boy book, if you're putting real money into a book, restoration can often, or conservation can often be an investment that creates equity for you. So, and if you want to pick up some of these skills, if you have an interest, it's a long process. You're going to need a lot of patience. You're going to need a lot of attention to detail. You're going to have to buy a fair amount of equipment. But if you want, there's so much information and resources out there. My channel and Larry's channel here on YouTube, in addition to the channel of Jerry the Jitterbug and others. And I would say just start reading and start practicing, but practice on some really inexpensive books, because you're going to make a lot of mistakes.
And yeah, as I said, absolutely does. Sure does. If you have tape that's as old as the book, and the book was stored in like a varying temperate place where the humidity kept changing every year, and it just kept getting, like, basically over time the tape is going to eat away at the paper, the adhesive, and you're going to lose at least the top layer of color. And so it's like
the adhesive, the
tape is evil.
The plastic
tape
part
is
comes
bad.
apart, but the
It's not
adhesive,
good.
it's just like acid.
It's a convenient. It's why kids, along with pop, I assume nationwide, it was just what was available, and it was like just
there were a lot of kids doing it. Sure,
use the tape, and it was because it was cheap and easy. It wasn't about what.
And because you wanted to keep reading your comic book.
Yeah.
It was short-term preservation, actually. Like, you can make the argument for it, but long-term evil.
And by the way, shout outs to Serge and Bub and Found Footage as well. Thanks for joining in, and thanks for commenting. Bub says, as a golden age collector with a large amount of taped books, some by myself, I'm pleased with the tape getting a pass. Well, yeah, that's why they made the decision they made, folks like you. I have always avoided tape on books. Even as a young collector, I hated it. Same. Just like different people value different things, right? Just like we were talking about, Phil doesn't like the dust shadow on the back of that book, right? That's a turnoff. I just from day one, I thought, this can't be right. It's all yellowed and everything underneath the tape. That's not where I want to be. So I actually have very few books with tape on them, personally. But Maurice reminded us, no Bestine in Canada. Can you not get the hexane? Oh
yeah,
man,
he can probably get hexane.
You need to go down to Niagara Falls or Niagara or Buffalo or something and run that across the border.
That's what I would do.
I don't know Found Footage, and generally I like to promote more folks that are regularly contributing. But if you're interested in a giveaway, we're almost done here, so maybe you can jump over to Found Footage's channel and win something. Bub says, exactly. If not for the tape of yesterday, many of us would not have complete books to conserve. Yeah,
that's
absolutely
true.
I'm not judging other folks. Yeah, I'm not judging so much as just saying it's not for me. But that doesn't mean I'm judging others. So anyway, thanks everybody for joining us. I really very much enjoyed that show. I hope you guys did. I put a fair amount of work into it.
No, you did a great job.
It was very comprehensive.
I'm happy that we had kind of a lot of interaction. Looks like we had a lot of viewers stick with us through an hour and a half, which we appreciate. We know you have many things you could be doing with your time. So thanks for being here with us. And anything else you guys want to say before we wrap up?
Nope. I'm just trying to think of if I'm going to be around next week. I should.
Yeah, where are you going to be next week?
I'm on the road usually. Let me think about this. I don't know. Let me look at my. I will be Sunday. I'll be in Korea or China. If I'm in China, we may have trouble having the show.
Oh
'Cause,
yeah,
yeah, it's
it's not really a free country.
they figured out how to jam my VPN. So we'll see. I'll let you know.
Wow.
I'll be in the audience though if I
Best
can't
of luck.
get the camera working.
Yeah. I know Shelby had a show overlapping with our show. He said he might join late, but I haven't seen him.
He
Thanks.
sent me a text message.
Yeah,
So,
thanks Revolver Comics, Travis, Don, everybody. But
Those
really,
guys.
again, appreciate everybody being here. Captain, maybe show us that Pop Hollinger book. I want to see that now.
give me
Not
one
right now, but I mean like
Yeah,
next show or maybe on your channel. That'd be great to see.
It's
Oh,
done.
nice.
Oh yeah.
Oh, nice.
I'm very much looking forward to it.
New spine.
We didn't talk about it much, but there's
No.
so much happening at Flying L Comics, people. If you're somehow not watching the channel, please go check it out. It's
This is
very
my
exciting.
first leaf casting project. This entire book, there's no Japanese paper. It's completely leaf cast. Everything is back together. The cover was in 2 pieces.
That's
It's
awesome.
completely split in half. So it's ready to be submitted. It'll probably go out tomorrow. Can't wait to see what
We've been watching with bated breath, and we'll be excited to see the conclusion to that story. Well, again, thanks everybody. Appreciate you. Appreciate my co-hosts. As always, this has been a blast. Have fun. Have a great week, and take care of one another. Bye
All right,
now.
bye everybody.
Bye, guys.